13. Black R&B stars with deathbed secrets that changed everything. What if I told you that behind the glittering lights and roaring applause, some of R&B's biggest icons carried secrets so dark they only revealed them on their deathbeds, from whispered confessions of forbidden love to chilling warnings of murder. These legends left behind truths that forever changed how the world remembers them. Their songs may have made us dance, but their final words will make you shiver. This is not just music history, it's the untold side of greatness. Welcome to Legends of Black Excellence. Hit like, subscribe, and let's uncover the secrets they tried to bury. Michael Jackson. In the final months of his life, Michael Jackson, the king of pop, was preparing for what was meant to be the most spectacular comeback of his career. The This Is It tour, with 50 sold-out shows scheduled at London's O2 Arena, was projected to reach millions and reaffirm his status as the greatest entertainer in history. Yet behind the rehearsals, the flawless dance steps, and the seemingly unstoppable energy, Michael was a man deeply fractured, his body failing, his spirit consumed by paranoia. What the public later learned was that his deathbed carried secrets darker than any stage performance could hide. Doctors and close aides revealed that Michael relied heavily on powerful medications just to sleep and perform. His body was plagued by insomnia, chronic pain, and weight loss, forcing him to lean on drugs such as propofol, a surgical anesthetic never meant for home use. Nurses recalled how he would plead for relief, whispering that he could not rest without it. But the most chilling detail came in the form of a secret he reportedly uttered in his final weeks. "They are going to kill me. I feel it." This statement, shared by a nurse and repeated later by relatives, changed everything about how fans remembered his final chapter. It was no longer simply a tragic case of medical malpractice. It became a story of fear, of a man convinced that forces around him were conspiring against his life. In interviews after his death, family members confirmed that Michael often expressed distrust toward those closest to his career, worrying that he was being exploited for money as he prepared for the massive tour. His fragile state of mind turned every rehearsal into an act of endurance rather than joy. Even in his last conversations, Michael's deepest wish was not for another record or encore, but for his children. He confided that he wanted Prince Paris and Blanket to live a normal life, free from the suffocating spotlight that had consumed him since childhood. This quiet plea painted a stark contrast to the image of the immortal superstar. On stage, he was larger than life. Off stage, he was a father desperate to shield his kids from the very machine that had destroyed his own peace. When news of his death on June 25, 2009 spread, fans worldwide were shattered. But as more details emerged, the reliance on propofol, the whispered fears, the frailty behind the curtain, the story shifted. His music, from Billie Jean to Man in the Mirror, began to be heard not just as entertainment, but as the cries of a man weighed down by isolation. Michael's deathbed secret, his whispered warning that they would kill him, remains one of the most haunting revelations in music history. It reframed his legacy, reminding the world that beneath the crown of the king of pop was a fragile soul whose fears may have been his final truth. Prince. Prince Rogers Nelson, known simply as Prince, was one of the most electrifying and enigmatic figures in music history. His genius stretched across decades, with over 150 million records sold worldwide, countless awards, and a reputation as a master who controlled every note, every lyric, every image associated with his name. To the public, Prince was invincible, a dazzling figure in purple bending the rules of sound, gender, and performance. But in his final years, behind the shimmering curtain of brilliance, he was hiding a secret that would only fully emerge after his sudden death in April 2016. Prince's friends later recounted that despite his seemingly tireless work ethic, his health was deteriorating. He was often frail, unable to sleep, his hands shaking from chronic pain that he never publicly admitted. Those closest to him noticed the toll, but rarely heard him speak openly about it. Prince never allowed weakness into his public persona. Yet in his last months, he privately revealed to confidants that the physical pain was unbearable. He quietly relied on prescription opioids, a dangerous secret, masked by his perfectionist image. On April 21, 2016, Prince was found unresponsive in his Paisley Park estate in Minnesota. The world reeled in shock. For days, fans clung to the hope that the mystery of his passing was just another twist in the life of a man who thrived on myth-making. But the truth came through his autopsy report. Prince had died from an accidental overdose of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid up to 50 times stronger than heroin. It was a revelation that stripped away the illusion of invincibility and left fans confronting a far more human Prince, vulnerable, suffering, and trapped in silence. The deathbed secret of Prince was not a dramatic confession whispered to the world, but the tragic truth his body carried. The man who had given everything to music had been battling pain so severe he risked the most dangerous of drugs to keep going. This revelation forced fans to look back at his last performances differently. The fiery guitar solos, the marathon shows, the blazing eyes under purple lights, were they triumphs of artistry or desperate attempts to hold on while his body betrayed him? Friends recalled that in private moments, Prince sometimes hinted at his struggle. He admitted he had trouble sleeping and that he worried about being seen as weak if the public discovered his dependency. His pride, the same pride that made him a legend, also became his prison. The world only saw the genius. No one was allowed to see the man trembling in solitude. In the aftermath, his fans and fellow artists felt a painful shift. Purple Rain. When Doves Cry, the Most Beautiful Girl in the World. These songs were no longer just works of brilliance. They became windows into a soul carrying burdens too heavy to share. Prince's deathbed secret was not only about drugs. It was about silence, about how even the most extraordinary lives can be consumed by ordinary human pain. And that changed everything. Whitney Houston. Whitney Elizabeth Houston, hailed as the Voice, was one of the greatest singers to ever grace the stage. With over 200 million records sold worldwide and more than 400 awards, her legacy as a global icon was secured long before her tragic passing in 2012. Yet, behind the glamour, behind the unrivaled voice that made arenas tremble, Whitney carried wounds that were hidden until her very last hours. Her deathbed secrets revealed not just the decline of a superstar, but the fragile desires of a woman who only longed for what millions take for granted: love, peace, and belonging. In the final days of her life, Whitney's health and spirit were visibly diminished. She was set to perform at a pre-Grammy party in Beverly Hills, but those close to her described her as exhausted, restless, and burdened by battles that stretched far beyond the spotlight. Years of substance dependency had taken their toll, and her once radiant presence seemed clouded by fatigue. Friends later recounted that in her last private conversations, she spoke with raw honesty about her fears. She confided her terror of being exploited, of people loving her name, her fame, her money, but not her true self. This whispered confession was a devastating contrast to the woman fans adored on stage. For decades, Whitney sang about eternal love in songs like "I Will Always Love You" and "Greatest Love of All." But in reality, she feared she had never truly known a love free of contracts, benefits, or betrayals. According to relatives, one of her last wishes was heartbreakingly simple: to have a real family, a stable and unconditional bond where she could simply be Whitney, not Whitney Houston, the superstar. Those around her in her final hours recalled her struggling to speak, her voice faltering, her whispers unclear. Some believe she was attempting to say goodbye, to express one last truth, but her body, weakened by years of strain, betrayed her. What remained was a look of anguish, an unspoken message that carried more weight than words. That moment became one of her greatest secrets, a farewell drenched not in music, but in silence. On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found lifeless in her hotel room at the Beverly Hilton just hours before she was to appear at Clive Davis's annual gala. The coroner later confirmed drowning complicated by heart disease and cocaine use, but the real revelation was not medical. It was emotional. Whitney's deathbed secret was her yearning for normalcy, for genuine love, for a simple life away from the crushing pressures of fame. In the years since every performance of My Love Is Your Love, or Didn't We Almost Have It All has been heard differently, fans no longer listen only to the perfection of her voice, but to the pain it carried. Whitney Houston's final secret reshaped her legacy. The world remembers not only the flawless diva, but also the fragile soul who at the end wanted nothing more than to be loved without condition. And that truth changed everything. Aretha Franklin. Aretha. Louise Franklin. The undisputed queen of soul, reigned for decades with a voice that seemed to rise from the very heart of gospel and shake the world with its power. With 18 Grammy Awards, over 75 million records sold, and timeless anthems like Respect and Natural Woman, she became more than a singer. She was a cultural force. Yet, as her body weakened from pancreatic cancer in 2018, whispers emerged of a secret she carried close to her chest, a revelation that stunned fans and reshaped how her story would be told. According to those close to her, Aretha confessed to something deeply personal in her final days, a love affair with another legend, the godfather of soul, James Brown. Rumored to have begun in the 1960s after a chance meeting in New York, their connection was said to have lasted for decades, hidden beneath the public facade of professional respect. One friend claimed she once described that first encounter with words that would never fade. "I had never been kissed, loved, or touched like that." If true, this was not a fleeting romance, but a love buried in secrecy unfolding over 40 years. Every time they shared a stage, every glance exchanged during joint tours, every lingering touch suddenly appeared to carry a hidden weight. The possibility of such a relationship between two titans of black music added a layer of vulnerability to Aretha's legacy. It suggested that behind her commanding presence on stage was a woman who carried an unspoken tenderness, a passion she could not display in public. Critics quickly pointed out the lack of documented evidence warning of tabloid exaggeration. But the absence of proof only intensified curiosity. Fans revisited archival footage of Aretha and James together, searching for subtle signs, a shared smile, a cryptic lyric, a knowing look. The ambiguity turned this rumor into one of the most haunting aspects of her story. What made this deathbed confession so powerful was not simply the possibility of romance, but what it revealed about Aretha as a person. She was always portrayed as strong, unshakable, a queen, commanding respect from presidents, musicians, and fans alike. But this whispered secret reframed her not only as an icon, but as a woman who yearned for intimacy and carried love she could never openly claim. When she passed on August 16, 2018, at age 76, the world mourned a giant. Her funeral was a national event with presidents, preachers, and stars paying tribute. Yet beneath the grandeur, her rumored secret love story with James Brown lingered in public imagination. It made listeners hear her songs differently. When she sang A Natural Woman, fans now wondered if it carried echoes of that hidden relationship. When she belted Ain't No Way, it sounded like the cry of a heart bound by silence. Aretha Franklin's deathbed secret transformed her legacy. It reminded the world that even queens of soul carry fragile hidden truths. In her final chapter, the woman who taught the world to demand respect left behind a story of secret love, making her both more human and more unforgettable. James Brown. James Brown, the godfather of soul, was a man of unmatched intensity. From I Got You, I Feel Good, to Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine. He transformed rhythm, funk, and soul with raw power that made him one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. His career spanned over 5 decades, earning him 3 Grammy Awards, 17 top 10 hits, and induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's very first class in 1986. Yet behind the electrifying screams, sweat-drenched performances, and fierce pride was a man whose last days revealed a startlingly humble truth. By the early 2000s, Brown's health had begun to falter. Years of relentless touring, legal battles, and personal controversies had weighed heavily on his body and his reputation. Those closest to him described his final months as quiet, often lonely, with moments of reflection that stood in sharp contrast to the fiery persona fans adored. And it was in those final hours that James Brown's deathbed secret emerged, not a shocking scandal, but a plea from the heart. He confided to aides and friends that he did not want his mistakes to overshadow his music. His repeated words were simple yet profound. "Don't let the rumors define me." For a man whose name had often been entangled with headlines about arrests, disputes, and tumultuous relationships, this statement carried the weight of his legacy. Brown wanted the world to remember not the chaos, but the music, the thunderous drum breaks, the funky bass lines, the soul-shaking cries that changed the course of popular music forever. Even in his last moments, he was fighting for respect, for the right to be remembered as the pioneer he knew he was. Those who were by his side in December 2006 recalled how he tried to summon strength to say thank you. For an artist once known for his commanding shout, these two words sounded both strange and moving, an admission that gratitude was more important than pride. His death from congestive heart failure at age 73 shocked fans, not because of its suddenness, but because it forced them to reconsider how they remembered him. The deathbed secret of James Brown reshaped his image. Fans revisited his catalog, no longer hearing just the energetic calls to dance, but also sensing the humanity beneath. In every get-up and every groove, there was the echo of a man who wanted desperately to be loved, not just applauded. Today, James Brown's legacy is more complex than ever. He is celebrated as the father of funk, the inspiration for hip-hop, and a voice of black empowerment. But his final plea, whispered when the stage lights had gone dark, changed how history views him. It reminded the world that even larger-than-life legends long to be remembered for their best selves. James Brown's deathbed truth was not about power or scandal, it was about forgiveness. And that confession changed everything. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye, the silky-voiced crooner whose music gave the world What's Going On, Sexual Healing, and Let's Get It On, was more than an R&B singer. He was the voice of an era. With 2 Grammy Awards, over 25 top 40 hits, and induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he used his music to address love, politics, and pain. Yet behind the brilliance was a lifetime of conflict, most painfully with his father, Marvin Gaye Sr. It was this fractured relationship that defined not just his personal struggles, but also his final deathbed secret. Friends and biographers have revealed that in the months leading up to his death in 1984, Marvin was consumed by a single wish: reconciliation. Despite the bitter arguments, the strict upbringing, and the emotional wounds inflicted by his father, Marvin longed for forgiveness. Those close to him said he confided a heartbreaking desire to simply tell his father he was sorry, that after decades of tension, he still wanted to be a son who could go home again. But fate denied him that chance. On April 1st, 1984, just one day before his 45th birthday, Marvin was shot and killed by his father in their Los Angeles home after a heated argument. The tragedy was made more unbearable by the knowledge of what Marvin had reportedly carried in his heart. His deathbed secret, his yearning to make peace with his father, was a truth never spoken aloud, silenced by violence before it could be realized. This revelation changed everything about how fans heard his music. Suddenly, What's Going On was not just a protest anthem, but also the cry of a son reaching for understanding. Sexual Healing. His late career masterpiece became tinged with desperation, a search for comfort he never truly found. Even his haunting live performances, where his voice seemed to teeter between ecstasy and sorrow, felt like coded messages from a man at war with himself and his family. The tragedy of Marvin's final wish lies in its ambiguity. Some believe he may have whispered an apology during the chaotic final confrontation. Others argue he carried it silently to the grave. That uncertainty only deepens the pain. Fans continue to wonder if in those last moments he found a brief glimmer of peace, or if his desire for forgiveness was forever unfulfilled. In the decades since his death, Marvin Gaye's legacy has grown more profound precisely because of this secret. His songs are no longer just soulful hits. They are heard as fragments of a diary documenting a life of yearning for love, for peace, for acceptance. Behind every note is the shadow of a man searching for something he could never quite grasp. Marvin Gaye's Deathbed secret reframed him not only as a musical genius, but as a wounded son whose final chapter was defined by regret. The man who gave the world timeless beauty left behind a truth that was unbearably human. Even the greatest voices can be silenced by the pain of forgiveness never spoken. And that changed everything. Otis Redding. Otis Redding was just 26 years old when his life ended tragically, yet he had already become one of the most influential soul singers in history. Known for timeless hits like Try a Little Tenderness and These Arms of Mine, he was often called the King of Soul. His raw, passionate voice carried both fire and tenderness, making him one of the defining figures of 1960s R&B. But in the hours before his fateful plane crash on December 10, 1967, Otis revealed something chilling, a secret that would forever change the way fans interpreted his final masterpiece. According to family members and close friends, Redding made a phone call just before boarding the small plane headed to Wisconsin. In that conversation, he reportedly mentioned that if anything were to happen, he wanted one particular song to define him, sitting on the dock of the bay. At the time, the track was unlike anything he had ever released. It was slower, quieter, filled with a haunting melancholy that stood in stark contrast to his fiery stage persona. With lines like "Sittin' in the morning sun, I'll be sittin' when the evening comes," the song carried a tone of resignation, almost as if he sensed time was running out. Many who knew him dismissed this moment as casual reflection, but after the crash, that statement became a deathbed secret in itself, a prophecy sealed in music. Just weeks after his death, Dock of the Bay was released and became his first and only Billboard #1 single, transforming into an eternal farewell. The song went on to sell over 4 million copies, earning 2 Grammy Awards in 1969, and remains one of the most played recordings in American music history. Biographers later noted how Redding had been unusually contemplative in his final months. He seemed tired, more thoughtful, and less consumed by the relentless drive that had fueled his rise to fame. Musicians who recorded with him recalled how he poured a different kind of energy into Dock of the Bay, almost as if he knew it would be his last gift to the world. This sense of foreboding turned his final recording sessions into something more than work. They became part of a haunting legacy. Otis's deathbed secret wasn't a whispered confession in a hospital room, but a message buried inside his art. Fans who revisit Dock of the Bay don't just hear a soul ballad anymore. They hear the voice of a young man who somehow foresaw his own end. That knowledge changed how listeners viewed his entire career. The energetic shouts of shake or respect are now contrasted with the stillness of Dock of the Bay, showing both the passion and fragility of a genius gone too soon. Otis Redding's final secret made his legacy even more enduring. He wasn't just the king of soul who left at the peak of his powers. He became a figure frozen in time, a man who seemed to sing his own goodbye before fate silenced him. That haunting choice of song transformed his death from tragedy into myth. Aaliyah Dinah Houghton, affectionately known as the Princess of R&B, was only 22 when her life was cut short in a tragic plane crash on August 25, 2001. Despite her youth, she had already sold 24 million records worldwide, starred in Hollywood films, and influenced an entire generation with her effortless blend of sensuality and innocence. Songs like Are You That Somebody, One in a Million, and Try Again made her a global icon. But behind the confident gaze and the poised maturity that amazed the industry, Aaliyah carried a private wish, a secret that would only be fully understood after her untimely death. Those closest to her revealed that Aaliyah often expressed a quiet longing to step away from the relentless glare of fame. While she loved music, she confided to friends that she dreamed of a normal life, one where she could build a family and be loved simply for who she was, not for her status as a star. To the public, she was a rising legend preparing for the release of her self-titled album and building a career that seemed unstoppable. But in private, her heart whispered for something far simpler: peace, stability, and genuine love unclouded by contracts, expectations, or the spotlight. In the days leading up to her death, Aaliyah had just completed filming the music video for Rock the Boat in the Bahamas. Crew members later remembered her being unusually reflective. One recalled her saying she felt at peace being near the water, as if she was already searching for calm beyond the chaos of her rising fame. Hours later, she boarded the small plane that would end her life. Witnesses said she seemed eager to return home quickly, her schedule demanding and exhausting. After the crash, stories of her private words and wishes began to surface. These confessions reframed her image from an untouchable star to a fragile young woman burdened with the weight of celebrity far too soon. Fans began listening to her music differently. Tracks like More Than a Woman or At Your Best suddenly carried a layer of longing, as though Aaliyah had been quietly signaling her desire for freedom all along. Her deathbed secret that she yearned for a simple, ordinary life changed everything about how she was remembered. Unlike some legends who leave behind confessions of scandal or regrets, Aaliyah's final truth was disarmingly human. She didn't crave more fame, more money, or more recognition. What she wanted was exactly what her fans wanted for themselves: love, peace, and authenticity. That is what makes her loss so haunting. The public mourned not only the end of a brilliant career, but also the silencing of a dream that was achingly modest. To know that a young woman who embodied glamour and perfection longed only for the ordinary made her even more beloved. Aaliyah's final wish reframed her legacy. She was not just the R&B princess taken too soon. She was a fragile soul, a dreamer who yearned for a life beyond the stage lights. And that secret, spoken softly, left unfinished, forever changed the way the world hears her voice. Natalie Cole, the daughter of legendary crooner Nat King. Cole spent her entire career balancing two identities: the heiress to a musical dynasty and an accomplished artist in her own right. With 9 Grammy Awards, a string of platinum albums, and her unforgettable 1991 album, Unforgettable. With Love selling more than 7 million copies in the United States alone, she proved again and again that her voice could stand beside and even beyond her father's. Yet in her final days, Natalie revealed a secret that shook her fans. It wasn't her illness that haunted her most, but the shadow of her father's legacy. Natalie battled health issues for years, including hepatitis C, which led to kidney failure, and eventually a transplant in 2009. By the mid-2010s, as her body weakened further, she began to speak more candidly about her inner fears, confiding in family and friends. Natalie admitted that her greatest torment wasn't her failing health, but the question that gnawed at her. Will people remember me for who I am, or only because I am his daughter? That confession was a powerful revelation. For decades, Natalie had fought to carve her own place in the music world. Her early albums like Inseparable and This Will Be an Everlasting Love established her as a force independent of her father. She even earned the Grammy for Best New Artist in 1976, proving she could stand on her own. But with her 1991 duet with her late father on Unforgettable Natalie, both cemented her place in history and reopened the very question she feared: was she celebrated for her own talent, or simply as the continuation of his? In her final days, those closest to her said she spoke often of this inner battle. She longed for validation, not just as a daughter who honored a legacy, but as an artist, a woman, and a fighter who had endured addiction, illness, and public scrutiny. Her music carried that struggle. Each ballad felt like both an embrace of her father's memory and a declaration of her independence. When Natalie passed on December 31, 2015, at age 65, her deathbed secret reframed her story. fans listened back to her catalog with a new understanding. This Will Be wasn't just a joyful anthem of love. It was a young woman claiming her space. Unforgettable was no longer just a technical marvel, but also the bittersweet symbol of a daughter reaching out to a father while simultaneously fighting to be seen as more than his shadow. Her confession that she feared being defined by bloodline rather than her own artistry changed the way her legacy was viewed. Today, Natalie Cole is remembered not just as Nat King Cole's daughter, but as a resilient star who overcame personal battles and left behind music that resonated across generations. Her deathbed secret made her more human, more relatable, and ultimately more unforgettable in her own right. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass was once the very definition of charisma in R&B. With his velvety baritone and commanding stage presence, he turned ballads like "Turn Off the Lights and Close the Door" into anthems of sensuality. As lead singer of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes and later a solo superstar, Teddy became the first black male artist to record 5 consecutive platinum albums in the U.S., a feat that cemented his place as an icon of 1970s soul. Women fainted at his concerts, and he was hailed as one of the most magnetic voices of his generation. Yet behind the glitz and adoration, Teddy carried secrets that surfaced only in his final years, truths that revealed the fragile man beneath the symbol of desire. In 1982, at the height of his fame, Teddy's life changed forever when a car accident left him paralyzed from the chest down. For many, it seemed his career would end there. But Teddy fought back, returning to the stage in a wheelchair and proving that his voice, not just his image, defined him. Still, the trauma of that crash haunted him for the rest of his life. Friends later revealed that in moments of vulnerability, Teddy admitted a deep fear that those around him were taking advantage of his weakness. He reportedly whispered once in panic, "Don't let them hurt me." That short but chilling statement exposed a side of Teddy. The public never saw a man who feared betrayal from the very people closest to him. His world, once filled with glamorous entourages and endless parties, had narrowed. In his final years, he reflected often on the life he had lived before the accident. Lavish, reckless, full of fleeting romances and excess. His deathbed secret was a confession of regret. He admitted to close confidants that he had traded too much indulging in pleasures that cost him the chance to build deeper, lasting relationships. For an artist who made a career out of singing about passion and intimacy, it was heartbreaking to realize that in the moments he needed love most, he often felt alone. The man whose concerts were filled with women throwing roses and lingerie onto the stage spent his last years yearning for genuine companionship, loyalty, and stability. Teddy's death in 2010 at age 59 came after a long battle with colon cancer. By then, he had already shared glimpses of his struggles in his 1998 autobiography, Truly Blessed, but the most intimate truths emerged only near the end. His confessions reframed his legacy not just as a soul superstar, but as a man who bore the heavy price of fame, indulgence, and tragedy. Listening today to Love TKO or Turn Off the Lights feels different. Beneath the seductive tones lies the voice of a man who ultimately admitted that passion without permanence left him empty. Teddy Pendergrass's deathbed secret, his regret for a reckless past and his fear of exploitation, made his story far more human. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway's voice was often described as a gift from heaven, warm, aching, and filled with a depth that could make even the hardest hearts tremble. With timeless recordings like A Song for You This Christmas, and his legendary duets with Roberta Flack Hathaway carved his name into the soul and R&B canon. Yet behind the music that radiated so much love was a man tormented by inner darkness. His death in 1979 at only 33 shocked the world. But the secrets he carried into those final days revealed the painful truth: Hathaway had been quietly crying for help all along. In the years leading up to his death, Hathaway battled severe mental health struggles, later diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenia. Colleagues recalled erratic behavior, sudden bursts of paranoia, and long stretches of depression that often left him isolated. But even as his illness deepened, he kept returning to the studio, pouring his anguish into his music. Friends later revealed that in his last recording session, something felt different. His voice still rich but covered by a fog of sadness. Every note sounded like a plea, every lyric like a coded message of despair. Just days before his death, Hathaway reportedly told friends in a quiet, broken voice, "I can't continue anymore." At the time, the words seemed vague, but in hindsight, they were chillingly direct, a confession that he had reached the end of his endurance. On January 13, 1979, Hathaway was found dead beneath the 15th floor window of his New York hotel room. Though officially ruled a suicide, the ambiguity of his final hours left fans and fellow artists struggling to make sense of the tragedy. That deathbed secret, his final admission that he could not go on, changed the way the world listened to his music. Songs once celebrated as soulful ballads were now heard as cries for help. A Song for You became not just a love song, but a farewell. Giving up sounded like a mirror of his inner turmoil. And someday we'll all be free later. Embraced as an anthem of hope took on new layers when paired with the knowledge of Hathaway's suffering. Roberta Flack, his closest collaborator, was devastated. She later said she could hear the torment in his final performances, but she never realized how close he was to breaking. Fans too looked back and realized that the signs had been there in the cracks of his lyrics, in the weight of his delivery, but had gone unnoticed until it was too late. Donny Hathaway's deathbed confession turned his story into one of the most haunting in music history. He was not just a soul genius taken too soon, but a fragile human being who whispered the truth before leaving the world. Today, his songs resonate more deeply because listeners know the price behind them. Every note carried the burden of a man fighting demons no one else could see. His final secret, that he could no longer continue forever, reframed his legacy. Donny Hathaway's music is not just a soundtrack of love and soul, but the eternal echo of a voice that longed to be free. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross, with his velvet baritone and flawless phrasing, became one of the most beloved voices in R&B. Over a career spanning 3 decades, he sold more than 40 million records, won 8 Grammy Awards, and gave the world unforgettable ballads like Dance with My Father, A House Is Not a Home, and Never Too Much. His songs celebrated intimacy, longing, and devotion, turning him into the soundtrack of love for millions. Yet in the shadows of that extraordinary success, Vandross carried a heartbreaking truth, one that only surfaced in his final days. According to close friends, Luther once admitted near the end of his life, "I'm still waiting. The time that I've spent being in love has never been reciprocated." For a man who dedicated his career to singing about romance, it was a devastating confession. Behind the dazzling stage lights and the luxurious velvet suits, Luther lived a life marked by solitude. His greatest secret was not about scandal, but about loneliness. He had never truly experienced the kind of unconditional love he sang so passionately about. Throughout his career, speculation surrounded his private life. Vandross never publicly addressed his sexuality, fearing that as a black male R&B superstar, coming out in an era still heavy with prejudice, could destroy his career. Patti LaBelle, one of his dearest friends, later confirmed that Luther had indeed loved deeply, but always in silence, never openly. He carried the painful contradiction of being the world's foremost interpreter of love, while living a life where his own affections were hidden. This silence shaped his music in ways fans only fully understood after his death. Every sustained note, every tender lyric carried the weight of a man longing for what he could not claim. When he sang, "A House Is Not a Home," audiences swooned at the raw emotion, never realizing it was also the cry of a man who often returned to an empty apartment. His last great hit, Dance with My Father, which won Song of the Year at the 2004 Grammy Awards, became even more poignant. It was not only about family, but about the yearning for love and connection that had defined his life. Luther suffered a massive stroke in 2003 that left him partially paralyzed and largely withdrawn from public life. In his final years as his health declined, those close to him said his biggest regret was not missed awards or fading fame, but the fact that he had never experienced love openly without fear or compromise. His death in 2005 at age 54 was a blow to the world of music, but the true heartbreak came with the revelation of his deathbed secret that he had given the world endless love through music, yet never received it fully in return. That confession changed everything. Fans began to hear his songs differently, not just as ballads of passion, but as diary entries of a man longing for love he never had. Luther Vandross's legacy remains one of the richest in R&B history, but his deathbed truth reframed it forever. He was not only the poet of love, but also its most tragic witness. And that made him unforgettable. Kenny Green. In the golden age of 1990s R&B, Kenny Green's name may not have been splashed across every headline, but his fingerprints were all over the music. As the lead singer of the trio Intro, his voice carried the group's hits like Love Thang and their haunting cover of Stevie Wonder's Ribbon in the Sky. Beyond his own group, Kenny was also a songwriter for some of the biggest stars of the era. He penned tracks for Mary J. Blige, including contributions to her landmark debut, What's the 411, and collaborated with artists like Will Smith. His music gave joy to millions, but Kenny himself lived in silence, hiding truths too heavy to reveal until his final days. By the late 1990s, Green's health was deteriorating. He appeared thinner, weaker, and often retreated from the public eye. Rumors swirled, but he never addressed them. Then in 2001, confined to a hospital bed, Kenny made a decision that would forever change how he was remembered. In a courageous interview with Sister 2, Sister Magazine, he spoke openly about two secrets he had carried all his life: that he was bisexual and that he was dying of AIDS. The confession was as heartbreaking as it was groundbreaking. In an era when the music industry, and especially black male R&B singers, faced immense stigma around both sexuality and HIV, Green's choice to speak out was revolutionary. He admitted he had loved women, had girlfriends, but also had deep feelings for a man who he revealed had infected him. Kenny described how a small bump on his leg had grown into a swelling the size of a tennis ball, a physical reminder of the illness he could no longer conceal. Yet instead of bitterness, he offered honesty. His most powerful message was not about fame or regret, but about responsibility. Protect yourself. Use condoms. Don't have unprotected sex. Those words were not delivered as a lecture, but as a plea, the cry of a man who knew his time was short and wanted to prevent others from following the same path. It was a deathbed secret that carried not shame, but courage. What made Kenny's final revelation so haunting was its vulnerability. Here was a man who had written love songs for the world, but had never been allowed to live fully in his own truth. Fans who once swayed to his romantic ballads suddenly heard them differently. The tender lyrics now echoed with deeper meaning, the voice of someone who yearned for love, acceptance, and freedom, but who spent much of his life hiding in silence. Kenny Green passed away on October 1, 2001 at just 32 years old. His loss was devastating, but his final confession ensured that he would not be forgotten as just another voice in a group. Instead, he became a symbol of bravery in the face of prejudice, a man who transformed his pain into a message of truth. Kenny's deathbed secret reframed his legacy. He was not only a talented singer and songwriter, but also a pioneer who dared to break the silence surrounding HIV and sexuality in black music. His honesty, spoken from a hospital bed, changed everything. In the end, these deathbed secrets remind us that even the greatest legends carried private battles the world could never see. Their voices shook stadiums, yet their final words revealed fears, regrets, and truths as fragile as our own. Were these confessions cries for help or final gifts to the fans who loved them? That's for us to decide. At Legends of Black Excellence, we honor not just their music, but their humanity. Do you believe these secrets changed how we remember them, or do their songs stand untouched by tragedy? Let's debate it below.